And joining us now for more is the executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online, Mike Benz. Mike, nice to have you on. To me, that proves conspiracy right there. I don't know why it's not getting more attention.
Well, I think the Gary Underhill case was mentioned in the Ramparts disclosures in the late 1960s and 70s, and the CIA was responding to the media backlash against the Central Intelligence Agency at that time. It's important to remember that this pressure on the CIA over the Kennedy killing is not a recent phenomenon. It was actually part of the driving force of the church committee, of what led up to the church committee hearings in 1975 and 1976.
Right.
The Great Suspicion, because in 1969. Bobby Kennedy was also assassinated after winning effectively the DNC nomination, or seriously moving up, as the contender for president. And then you had this. It was during those 1970s hearings and the scandals around the CIA at the time, the media publicity against the CIA, that led to the creation of a Senate Intelligence Committee and a House Intelligence Committee, which did not exist at that time. And so the CIA is very sensitive to media pressure. And so a lot of these documents do show essentially their media relations panic over their own activities being exposed.
Yeah, the Gary Underhill stuff to me just adds to a long list of very suspicious things that have come out over the last 62 years. The CIA, by the way, if they were involved, they would want that media wing to be pretty active to cover this up. And maybe that explains why this has all been covered up and not exposed over the last 62 years. JFK's got a friend, Arthur Slesinger. They went to Harvard together. He wrote a 15-page memo calling for JFK to break up the CIA. I believe it was in 1961. Do you think that started what ultimately happened and set in motion what happened in 1963 in Dallas?
What I find most interesting about that memo is that it sort of echoes an eternity now for what's happening with USAID. Most of what we now consider to be 1950s through 1970s style CIA work is done today by USAID. And when you see the phrase agency-sponsored organizations in these CIA documents, which is a phrase that's littered throughout it, the unions were agency-sponsored, the student groups were agency-sponsored, the media outlets were agency-sponsored. Today, that means more often than not, the agency is the U.S. Agency for International Development rather than the Central Intelligence Agency. And in that memo, what you see is a power struggle, a turf war between the CIA and the State Department, because the State Department was really supposed to have these CIA capacities in the first place. This all goes back to 1948, when George Kennan was setting this all up. And what you see in that Schlesinger memo is that they felt that the role of the State Department, which the CIA was supposed to serve and provide covert assistance to, policy, and that the State Department was relegated to being, in effect, a rubber stamp. That was the phrase used by Arthur Schlesinger, because of the various cloak and dagger techniques and ways of hiding things.
Mike, JFK said, I'm going to break the CIA up into a million pieces after the Bay of Pigs. And that was, April 61. He had just gotten in office. He took the blame, but that was set up by the Eisenhower administration. I'm wondering your take on this, just your opinion. And I know we're going to get more information. 80,000 documents. CBS News today trying to say that there's nothing here, that they've looked through all 80,000 documents. Sure you have, CBS News. Again, they've been covering this up for 62 years. Why stop now? Why didn't the family care? I can only speak for Ted Kennedy. Teddy said over the years that he didn't want to get shot himself, so he didn't want to dig too deep. Bobby accepted the Warren report. I think it was too painful for him. Jackie, maybe too painful. But ensuing generations, no one has really bothered to ask difficult questions about what happened to the most famous Kennedy of all, JFK, our 35th president.
Well, it's a legacy family that's deeply tied to the foreign policy establishment. It's deeply tied to the power structures within the Democrat Party. I think there's a sense that some things are untouchable. I mean, that was the name of the James Douglas book that published much of the redacted files that we now have fully unredacted, was called JFK and the Unspeakable. And I think that you see this happen sometimes when someone dies in the family, and I had a situation like that when I was young, and some family members don't even want to know what's in the autopsy, because if it is what you think it is.